Hello, folks. If you're just joining us, welcome to Dressing Rebecca Gore with Carrie Midura, sponsored by Gore Place. And I'll give some instructions as we go. People are coming into the room, and as soon as we have a majority of the folks, we have a, whoops, I have to mute myself. There we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's working now. So, folks, I'll give you a little bit of information here as soon as I leave the meeting. It's not working for me. I can't mute myself completely. Welcome everyone to this presentation. So for this presentation, I just want to let you know that this is in the webinar format. So we can neither see you nor hear you, and you cannot see or hear each other. You should be able to see myself and Carrie Midura, or Carrie. I'm going to spotlight Carrie throughout this because she's giving the presentation. We do have two ways for you to communicate. You can put a question in the question portion of your Zoom app. So if you don't know where that is, if you look on your toolbar, it's about a third of the way down from the left. And if you open that, you can put a question. I want to let you know that I've set it so that all participants can see all of the questions. You can ask a question anonymously if you look at, there's an option for that. But everyone can see the questions, and you can also vote on the question. So you can upvote, as they call it, the question. So if you see someone asking a question that you are very much interested in as well, you can upvote that. We will have Carrie give her presentation, followed by a Q&A session in which I will ask the questions that you have typed in, and we will try to get to everyone's question. I may, along the way, if someone's asked a question that's very pertinent to what she's just showing on screen or talking about, I may interrupt to ask the question at that time. The other thing we have going is the chat. So just next to the Q&A, there is the chat. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Zoom at this point with the world. And so if you use the chat, I want to let you know that you are able to see everyone's chats except the ones that are sent to someone individually. So you can either send a chat to just the panelists, which would be myself and Carrie. You can send a chat to another attendee, or you can send it to everyone. And people will be able to see you there. And if we're still bringing people into the room, we've got over 40 people attending today, so we've got about a third of them here. If you want to tell us in the chat where you are watching from, or say hello to us, or give us a message to someone, feel free to do that. I'm going to be announcing a few times throughout the evening that we are very grateful to Mass Humanities, because this program is one of a series of webinars that we have put on this year, and it is funded by Mass Humanities in part, which receives support from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and is an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we thank both the Mass Humanities and Mass Cultural Council for supporting this program today. And we've got about a third or more of our attendees coming in. Let's see if we have some activity in the chat. We have someone says they are watching tonight all the way from across the street in Watertown. We are, if you are not familiar with Gore Place is a historic estate of the late 18th, early 19th century. We are in both Waltham and Watertown. The town line runs right through the center of our property, right about where the sheep fence is. And so if you are unfamiliar with that area, I will put in later into the chat some links to Gore Place and the other activities we have. And we are a membership organization. We always welcome new members. If you're impressed by what you see here tonight, I'm sure you will be, and you want to join Gore Place, I'll make it very easy for you to do that with a link Let's see what else we have in the chat. Welcome, everyone. I'm coming from, well, that's Carrie, her office at Old Sturbridge Village. And you can see Carrie's at work, even at this very hour. Watching from Waltham. Greetings from Randolph, fan of Gore State and Carrie. Oh, great. Well, we are a fan of Carrie's as well. Watching from Oregon. Well, that is the question I was going to ask. Who thinks they may be watching from the furthest distance away? So far, I think Oregon has won. Watching from Saratoga Springs, New York. Not as far away, but a good distance. And watching from Medford, Christopher Gore ordered bricks from Medford, from Charlestown and Medford, to build the beautiful 1806 mansion here. So we have a connection with Medford. Oh, what is my name and position at Gore Place? Susan Robertson wants to know. My name, I have neglected to say, is Tom Roach, and I'm the Director of Interpretation for Gore Place. Thank you, Susan, for reminding me. And I think that's it for the chat at this point. From North Carolina. Great. So we have someone coming from North Carolina. And we are getting close. I think we'll give it a few more minutes to let other people join. And for the folks that are just joining, I will repeat what I've just told our other guests, that my name is Tom Roach. I'm the Director of Interpretation at Gore Place in Waltham and Watertown, a historic estate. And tonight we are in a webinar format, so we can neither see nor hear you, but we can communicate through the chat. You can chat with an individual, or you can chat with a whole group, or just with panelists. Those are the options. And we also encourage you to put questions in the Q&A. And following the presentation, we will read out the questions to Carrie. And so your question will be answered, we hope, either along the way. She may answer your question as part of the presentation, and if not, then we will get to it at the end. And once again, for the new folks joining us, you might want to put down in the chat where you're joining us from. We're looking for the furthest away. So far, I think Oregon is winning. One of these webinars, Carrie, we had someone tuning in from Ireland, which had to be, what, 7 hours later?
Yeah, I think about that, yeah.
About that, yeah, they must have been quite very early in the morning for them. All right, now I see Prentice, thank you. I always feel like Miss Jean in Romper Room when I do this, because I see Tony and Bobby, and never knew how she did that. Remember Miss Jean on Romper Room? If you remember Miss Jean on Romper Room, yeah. Put it in the chat. Sometimes I make these references. Nobody gets. It's a long time ago. All right. All right, well, we are about halfway there. So I'll give it 2 more minutes and we'll start the presentation. And once again, for the new folks, I want to thank Mass Humanities. This program is funded in part by Mass Humanities, which receives support from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which is a state agency. And this is a series of webinars on Gore Place and the history of the late 18th, early 19th century America, which is our particular area of interest. And again, for the new folks, you could communicate through the chat. We cannot see or hear you. Hopefully you can see or hear us and hear us. And if not, please let us know in the chat. All right, Carrie, well, I think we have a quorum, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Okay. I just have one moment here watching from Waltham. Someone said they had a little bit of difficulty tuning in tonight. So I just want to say, if you had some difficulty, impossible to sign in, required a commercial Zoom account. All right, so the link that you are sent comes directly from Zoom, and it is an authentication requirement that you come in through a Zoom account, and that is for security reasons. So we do use the Zoom authentication. So I'm sorry about that if it was difficult.
We'll make it worth it. So now that everyone's here.
Yep. So just so people know that that is so that people that are invited to these things do not come and interrupt it. So it's a good function to have. And I'm sorry it was a little difficult, but yes, I'm glad you used your Facebook account to get in. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. Here you go. So I will make it so that you can share. Excuse me. 1 second.
That looks like I am.
Yep, you're all set. I think you can share now, Carrie.
All right, so I'm going to switch to full screen and hello, everyone. There we go. So definitely type in the chat if you can't see this, but everything looks good from my end. So I'd first like to give a huge thank you to Gore Place and to Mass Humanities for inviting me to present this program tonight. I'm always excited to do programs with Gore Place. I love the Regency era and gives me a great chance to dive a little bit deeper into aspects of dress history from the early 19th century. So for those I have not met before, my name is Carrie Midura. I am currently the coordinator of historical clothing at Old Sturbridge Village. So that means I oversee all of the reproduction clothing worn by our costumed historians throughout our 1830s rural New England village. I am coming to you from my office today. So if you look behind me, you're going to see a lot more 1830s clothing, although during this presentation, we're going to kind of start in about 1806 and go all the way up to the mid 1830s to the time of Rebecca's passing. And as I was pulling these details together, I wanted to touch on a couple different segments of Rebecca's time. Now, of course, she was born well before the time the mansion was finished, but the period that the house was built is really where I wanted to start this program. So as we continue along, you'll see me reference this a couple different ways, and that's taken from newspaper accounts of the time of how the Gore's home was described by both themselves and by the larger community. So it's often referred to as the country's seat, the farm in Waltham, Gore's garden. So you may hear me refer to those interchangeably. And we're going to talk about what Rebecca and people of her association were wearing through those different periods. So the 5 key areas that I'm going to take you through on this little bit of a time traveling journey is the very beginning, when Gore Place, the estate, was finished in 1806 and became their summer residence. Now, they really were just enjoying it during the summers at that time. And Tom and all the other wonderful staff at Gore Place can talk to you more about how the mansion was used, but they weren't living there permanently. They still had their residence in Boston. In 1809 into 1810 is when Christopher Gore was elected governor. He served a term and then he went on to become a senator. He was elected in 1813 and served in 1814. And during that time, Rebecca took on the role of politician's wife. Now, they were still spending some time at the estate, but also had a lot more demands on their social life as a result of being put in such a place of prominence. By 1816, they had retired from Boston. That doesn't mean they ignored Boston altogether and forswore all fashion and the latest trends just to hang out in the country. But they did turn Gore Place into their permanent year-round residence. And so that's going to necessitate some change in their fashion as well. Sadly, in 1827, we see the loss of Christopher Gore, and that's going to change life for Rebecca, including the idea of her going into mourning and needing a separate wardrobe, or at least some separate accessories for that period. And then finally, sort of a sad close to the story, we're going to go right up to Rebecca's death in 1834, and those final days of saying farewell to the estate in Waltham. So, with that, let's get started to the very beginning of the estate. So enjoying those summers at the farm in Waltham, which it was most commonly referred to, those first few years, before Christopher Gore is going full on into politics. And so I've pulled in an assortment of fashion plates and extant dresses. I tried to make sure that most of the dresses that I'll be showing you are ones I've either seen in person or have had the chance to do a little bit more study of. The fashion plates at this time are primarily English and occasionally French. This one we see here, which is two walking dresses. One woman is seated, one woman is standing. And this dates to 1809 from the Ackerman Repository of the Arts. Now, Ackerman was a printer. He had a shop where he had books printed. And in each one of those, there were fashion plates, as well as samples of fabric, as well as other stories and news. It isn't until much later in the 19th century that you start seeing fashion plates being printed in the Americas. So prior to this, you're in this period of the beginning of the 19th century, American women, and they did consider themselves American women, this is well after the Revolution, they're still deferring to a lot of English and French fashion ideas. That's still where they're borrowing from. So what you see here, and is sort of the ideal of that first decade of the 19th century, are very high busted gowns, lots of white sheer fabrics. It's a carryover from that neoclassical look. And the silhouette is long and lean and straight. Now, for a walking dress, that's going to be something where you're literally walking around town. You might get in a carriage to travel in this. It might be what you wear to promenade in the park, to go do your shopping in Boston. And none of these pieces of clothing would have been unusual to Rebecca and those of her social and economic caliber. I loved this one because this fashion plate, because you can actually see some of the details on the Spencer, which is on the figure standing in the back. And the description is just lovely. So for those that are having trouble with the size of the screen, I'm going to read this out loud. A Venetian Spencer of violet satin, sarcenet, with a row of small round buttons embroidered in silver, with a pendant loop to each. So that's a loop made of the same fabric. Continues at the neck with a silk cord or silver tassel. I love how even the illustration, even the person writing the description isn't quite sure what they're describing. Beaver hat of the same color. So that just means the hat itself is made of fur and blocked, and it's from felted beaver fur. It's rather small, turned up in front with another silver button and loop. It's a worked muslin dress and skirt, and muslin in this case refers to the very sheer, often white or nearly white fabrics being woven in India. And worked just refers to the fact that there's some sort of embroidery or decoration on it. So worked muslin dress and skirt to show the feet and ankles, black silk slippers, and Yorktown gloves, I'm sorry. Gloves were the norm. And it's funny, I was literally just having a discussion about this with some people at work today. In the most of history, life was tough on your hands, even in slightly more refined households. So in most cases, you're wearing gloves both to protect your hands when they go out and to hide any roughness of your hands. So in nearly every fashion plate we see, and even the way a lot of mannequins are dressed in for museum galleries, you'll see gloves on people. So it was not unusual at all to have multiple pairs, multiple colors, multiple fabrics of them. Now, this is one of the, this is a black and white image. This is at the MFA Boston. So it is not a white dress with a gray Spencer, but it is a silk Spencer. And you can see how high and short this is. It does date to roughly the same period, but I wanted to include this example because this one was actually worn in Lexington, which is the next town over from Waltham. So there's a lot of detail to this. There's a lot of ruching at the collar. That's the gathered up bits, and along the back above the fullness of the skirt, at the shoulder, and again at the cuff. Now, Lexington was not as prominent a town as Waltham was in terms of its economic status. It was just a little bit further away from Boston. There wasn't quite as much industry there. It was still more of a farming community, not poor by any standards, but for this to be being worn in Lexington, it kind of gives you a sense of what could be being worn in Waltham that's even above and beyond that, especially for someone of Rebecca and Christopher's background. What you're not going to see in most of these images throughout the rest of the program is what is worn underneath. Now, on all of the people dressed in the portraits and the fashion plates, what you're seeing as the basemost layer is a shift. That's the image all the way on the right, the short sleeves. You may see some sleeveless versions for ball gowns and so on, but the one on the right with the short cap sleeves is pretty normal for most of the 1806 through the 1830s period. And that's going to be that garment that soaks up any body oils, any dirt. Something can be washed easily because it's white and all that dirt and grime can be boiled away. And it's going to protect the clothing and you from each other. Over that, you're going to see the garment all the way on the left. That is stays or a corset. The term is most often stays at the beginning of this period that we're talking about, in that 1806 to 1809. By the time we get to the end of this, the 1830s, the term stays and corsets are interchangeable. And some of that has to do with the continuing influence of French fashions. The words just mean the same thing. By our period here at Old Sturbridge Village, we have diaries where one person is talking about the same garment, and in one day she's talking about making her stays, and the next day she's saying, oh, just finished my corset. So clearly everyone, the terms are progressing as the century does too. Now the garment in the center is a petticoat. It's a bodice petticoat. And one thing you will notice throughout all of the period that we look at today is that the waistline is unnaturally high. And the stays help hold the bust line at a higher point. That's what the horizontal ribbing is doing. And there's typically a long stiffened piece of wood or whalebone to keep a flat center front. That's the busk. But with that raised waistband, it means it's really hard to tie skirts around your waist and have them hang exactly where you want it to, because the waist is now not the smallest part of your body. So you see more and more strapped or bodiced petticoats. And that's an example here. This one is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. These are also, all of these garments do tend to be in whites or natural colors and other things that are easy to launder. They're not meant to be seen. They also don't add any additional color or pattern underneath some of the sheer dresses that are being worn. In some occasions, and you will see this in fashion plates and a couple of extant dresses that exist out in the world, there was a fashion at times for wearing a colored petticoat or a colored slip underneath a sheer dress. But that was pretty high fashion and not necessarily an everyday wear. So it's possible, but for the most part, they're going with the whites and kind of, again, going back to that neoclassical look. And here we have that neoclassical look. This is one that is at the MFA Boston, and it is being worn by very much a contemporary of Rebecca Gore. Now, this is what we'd refer to as that worked muslin. It's very fine white cotton, and it is covered in embroidery. So you can see all of these scallops down at the bottom of the hem. Those are all individually embroidered, as are decor going right up to the center of the dress and across some of the bodice as well. This was sort of that ideal, and it was used both for day wear with less working to it, as well as for evening wear, which all of that worked detail may also have some spangles and some other things to reflect the light and candle light as well. I mentioned Ackerman's repository. This is one of those swatches that exist in his books. You can find these on Google Books. I'm fortunate to have some friends that have some original copies as well. And in each issue, in most of the issues, it's not every year, there'll be a page like this that lists patterns of British manufacture. This is from June 1809. And the one swatch that covers piece 1 and 2 is actually meant for upholstery. So I don't have the description here. But you can see just how the print is showing through these swatches of fabrics, how sheer they are. So there are colored fabrics going over it. What I'd like to draw your attention to is number 4, which is that white and green coral figure, coral referring to the design motif, not the color, much worn for mantles and pelisses. Mantles would be almost like a semi-constructed shawl that fits over your shoulders. And pelisses are a floor-length combination of dress and coat, and typically worn as outerwear. Though in general protest against green for ladies' wear, yet when sparingly displayed on a white ground like this pattern, it produces a shade that will suit many complexions. What makes me giggle about this particular one is I think it's only 3 or 4 months later that they're going on about how wonderful a green color is for women's dresses during this period. So fashion is fickle then and now. But the Ackerman's repositories are wonderful because you really get a sense of what the texture is of the fabric and what was being sold at any particular time, because these were being printed regularly with the swatches glued into them. So you can pretty reliably date particular trends and patterns that way as well. Now, as we move out of that first decade and we get into the that beginning of the 1810 to 1815, there's going to be a lot more obligations on Rebecca's time. Now, in a house like the Gore estate, there's going to be a fair amount of hosting dinner parties and assemblies and so on. And for those that haven't had the chance to visit for one of their lovely indoor or outdoor events, it's a gorgeous property. But I know I look forward to the day when the pandemic isn't dictating all of our plans and can return for holiday teas inside the Gore estate, because the house was truly designed for entertaining and it is beautifully suited to that. And Rebecca would have been expected to do that. Now, more of her entertaining probably would have taken place in Boston during this time, which is obviously the seat of the Commonwealth here in Massachusetts. But she would have had a need for a lot of fancier dresses and finer attire on a regular basis. So more evening things, maybe going out to events. We don't have a lot of details of, exactly how they spent every hour of every day and every event they might have gone to and hosted. But we do know what was available for entertainments in Boston. There were a number of operas and theater that was able to be attended. By this period, there's at least 5 different theaters in Boston, never mind the other places that are gathering locations for listening to speakers, going to museums. The Massachusetts Historical Society was founded, probably going to get this date wrong, I think 1794, and the Gores were supporters of that as well. So these are all places you could go and see and be seen and be there for events. So a dress like this would have been very much within the realm of the Gores, what Rebecca might have in her wardrobe. This particular one is a patterned silk. This is from the MFA. And one of the reasons I selected this one is it does have a Massachusetts provenance as well. So not only is it in the collection at the MFA Boston, it actually was worn by somebody who, I believe this one was from Stoughton, Mass, which is just south of Boston, for those that don't know their Massachusetts geography. So very close by. And you see that we're still carrying that higher than average waistline, but it is starting to drop a little bit. It's not quite spilling over the top. You're seeing a little bit more structure go into the bodice. You're also seeing a little bit more structure go into the sleeves, a little bit more detailing, less straight lines, adding some frill around the hem.
Carrie?
Yes, Tom.
I have a question that maybe you can answer with this image.
Sure.
So Danielle would like to know, were the trains detachable or were they dragged around in the dirt? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Smiley face.
Excellent. Great question, Danielle. Thanks for asking. So the trains for this particular dress and many like it were not detachable. There are, in some cases, there are ways to places to kind of bustle it up, but more often a dress like this would be meant to be worn indoors, and there would be a small place to hold the dress up as you traveled in and out of a building. But yeah, this dress is not meant for kind of strolling the streets or even or outdoor events. You don't see a lot of that for this type of fabric. Not that it'd be unheard of, but it really was meant to be indoors when someone has already, all of the messy shoes and things have already been left at the door, and you're walking into a perfectly clean space, and you're walking into a place where people are going to be accustomed to walking around trains. For those that haven't, I dress in period costume as well as make it and study it. And for those that are not accustomed to wearing trains or being around people in trains, there is a learning curve. So there'd be certain places you'd go to that you'd sort of just fall into that habit of knowing not to step on other people's skirts.
So Carrie, I have a question. So I've seen in films where when dancing, there would be a loop or something that would go around the wrist.
Yep.
Would that be this period?
That is this period. Yep. There's all sorts of tricks throughout this period that you can loop something. It's often just a loop that goes over the center finger. So you can hold that out of the way. That being said, a trained dress like this is going to be more typical for dinner or opera or something like a reception. You're not typically going to be dancing in dresses with a train as much. It's just not practical. There were ball dresses that had fuller skirts that would show off to advantage without actually being trained, without actually having trains that would risk being stepped on and being damaged. So hopefully that answers that question. And speaking of opera dresses, so this is from 1815. So we're nearing sort of the end of Christopher Gore's political career. And this advertisement is from Boston. Like I said, there's 5 different theaters in Boston, or 5 different places to see theater in Boston. You're not seeing a lot of opera in Boston this early in the 19th century, but intermittently it is there. It really starts to take off in the 1820s and 30s, or you'll have musicians playing smaller excerpts from popular operas from Europe. But it wouldn't be unusual for for people of their caliber to go do this. Opera dress is often some of the fanciest dress that you see out there, short of going to court in England, which is something the Gores also would have been familiar with, but wouldn't have needed to dress to that extent here in Massachusetts. That being said, the former colonies, as they're often referred to, so the Americas, they are often described as being more dressed up than their English counterparts. So it's sort of like the Americans kind of got a taste of like what it was like to be on their own and then took it up to that next level. You see this happening from the time of the post-American Revolution through the earlier part of the 19th century. So although I don't have records of what specifically Rebecca might have worn, we do have descriptions of people attending musical events north of Boston in some of the other wealthier port towns like Salem and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they are being described in ensembles nearly as over the top as this, with the befeathered turban and with the jewels and with the gloves and not quite sure what's in her hand. I think it's probably a fan. If you notice, she has silk satin shoes on her feet. So everything is just to the final polished degree. And so again, is this what Rebecca was wearing at Gore Place? Probably not, because they weren't doing too much opera or theater right on the grounds there. But she would have had to spend more time hostessing and being known for having more prominent members of society visit her. This is also during the period of the War of 1812, and many of you may be familiar with Dolly Madison's stories. And Dolly Madison opened up the White House to guests every week. She was always dressed very, very well. Not opera well, but very, very well, and welcoming people of all from across society as the wife of the president. Rebecca Gore obviously wouldn't have those kinds of responsibilities, but again, being the wife of the governor and later on senator, she was hobnobbing with some of the most respectable people in Boston, but she also would have probably needed to be somewhat approachable by other constituents of the Commonwealth as well. So after they have their fun gallivanting in Boston and getting to get their taste of politics, the Gores do retire to Waltham in 1816. There we go. And they are there together for the next sort of 10 and a half years. And this is where, if you haven't visited the house, again, highly recommend taking a tour, because there's some really fascinating architectural details and structural details of how the house was transformed to make it comfortable year round. For those that aren't familiar with New England climates, they're changeable. As in, let's see, last weekend it was 75 degrees. This weekend, I think it's going to be down to the lower 20s. So it really is true. Don't like the weather, wait a few minutes. It's going to be colder here. It's going to be cold winters. They're going to need to adapt to that. It's also a very spacious house, so they're going to need to have the clothing that will support that as well. There's also going to be more time sort of enjoying that country life. Now, we know the Gores, and Rebecca especially, was fascinated by architecture and horticulture, and they did spend time visiting the beautiful country estates in England. And of course, that's partly what inspired her with many of the choices for the Gore estate. And that would have included having, your mornings in a slightly slower pace. It's not city pace, it's country pace. And even though Gore Estate is only about 9 miles outside of Boston, it really would have been a slightly different culture. Not shut off from Boston, but a different speed of life, and definitely more focused on the kind of agrarian, rural surroundings that the property had. Now, this morning dress reminds me of lots of different Jane Austen movies, but is pretty typical, and you'll see in the next slide an extant one that still exists today. And this would have been a dress that was a little bit easier to get on in the first part of the day. It wasn't unusual to change several times, depending on the events that you have going on, whether it's expecting visitors or going out to visit someone. Maybe you are going for a walk. That's not going to be the same thing you put on in the morning to get up and enjoy your toast and tea as you start the day. But as we get into sort of the later teens into the 1820s, like this 1822 fashion plate, you start seeing the waistline dip a little bit lower, and you start seeing ruffles explode more and more across the dress trimmings. Now, if we think back to the worked muslin dress that I showed the extant example of, the original dress, that had beautiful worked embroidery, but it was very flat against the dress. So there was nothing really protruding from it. It was all surface embroidery. This dress, if you look at, even though it's a fashion plate, if you look at the hem, you can see that's layers of embroidered pieces on it. So it's not worked onto the base fabric, it's actually embroidered and then attached to a dress. Same thing goes for the collars and the caps around her, the cap and ribbons around her head. There's extra ribbons applied over the cape over her shoulders. There's extra ruffles and extra embroidery and details at the wrist above the cuff as well. And we're sort of slowly creeping towards the decade where all grown women are dressed as toddlers and lots of white ruffles all around them. I do want to draw your attention to the last line of this description, in that the body fastens behind, plain and high, a little open towards the throat, trimmed with that same delicate work that decorates the cape. So the cape in this case refers to the piece that comes out to your shoulder. The cloak is that big heavy winter garment that you would keep to keep rain and snow off of you. So the cape is a small delicate garment. And what decorates the cape is 2 rows separated by puffing of plain book muslin through which a lilac ribbon is drawn. Now, I want you just to hold on to that description, because we're going to see that a couple slides down, a dress that still exists that has those puffs of book muslin that I included some really close-up shots so you can see what it is that I'm talking about there. This, however, is another morning dress, and this is morning as in the time of day, not saying farewell to a loved one. But you can see again how much more depth there is to the fabric. All of this ruching and ruffles is applied separately to the dress. It's not all just surface embroidery. You're starting to see a lot of tucks. I don't think this one has cording in it, but it's causing stiffening at the bodice. You can also really see how much lower this bodice is than some of the earlier ones. We're also starting to see some fullness in the upper sleeve as well. For those that are more familiar with fashion history, you might know that the 1830s are a period where the sleeves, like the pink dress behind me in my office, really gets to almost sort of watermelon size. We're starting to see that as we get into the 1820s. But this is an easy to put on, comfortable dress, really not a lot of, it looks fussy to our mind, but easy to wear, not a lot of fixtures, not a lot of things we have to worry about. Of course, being in the countryside, you're going to need to get outside now and then. And this actually feels like the weather we had here today in Massachusetts, where it was very breezy and could use some light coverings. But here we have a silk pelisse, and here's that green. So here we are, okay, this one's a couple years later, but they're all about the green. And this is still Ackerman's repository saying that it is a beautiful Spanish green, and that's what this pelisse should be made out of. To each their own, again, fashion changes. Now this one you can see, again, it's about the same time as the previous dress. It has some of the fullness in the sleeve. The sleeves are still relatively roomy all the way down, so you can get something else underneath this. A pelisse is typically going to be the outer garment, so chances are she's wearing another lightweight dress underneath that. In fact, you can see some of the white around the hem. She's also wearing more practical boots rather than some of the slippers we've seen in previous fashion plates. The description of this one is very long. I didn't want to include all of it, but it does have some calyx trimming, so that's parts of a plant, and that's using, again, that same rolls of fabric to create designs on the dress. So all of the trimming you see is from the dress fabric. Also, there is a plain rouleau of satin around the hem. It's a little bit tough to see because her dress is so windblown, but the rouleau is typically a narrow tube of fabric that is stuffed with wadding, or what we know as batting today, that gives just a soft piping around the details. And it's really coming into its own in the 1820s. She is wearing matching jonquil, as in the color, kid gloves and boots. To my mind, it also looks like her umbrella is the same color as well. So there were all of those matching accessories. The shawl is not described in the fashion plate. But she is wearing a matching a matching bonnet. This particular one is a cottage bonnet. Bonnets were given all sorts of names. So a cottage bonnet could refer to one thing one year and something else entirely different just a few years later. And she is wearing a bonnet cap. And so in this case, the bonnet cap is being worn to protect the bonnet from her hair, because the bonnets are often lined in silk. Now, if someone was just running quickly outside and needed to cover their head, they might not bother with a bonnet cap underneath if their hair was dressed. But certainly if you're going to be spending long periods of time outside, you're going to want to have your hair contained under the cap and then the bonnet over that to transfer. So to prevent any transfer of hair oils and things like that into your beautiful silk bonnet. And here we have a silk pelisse with rouleau trim. Now this does not have the rouleau trim around the hem, but you can see that it does have it creating all of these designs along the belt, along the front bodice, up and down the sleeves. This is also a holdover from the influence of military design, mostly coming from the Napoleonic and then the War of 1812 influence. So you see a lot of fabrics being used to imitate military braid and have almost a militaristic styling and masculine styling to these garments. They're made up of very feminine fabrics and often very feminine colors, silks and so on. They often have padding in them, so they're actually practical garments, especially the ones made here in New England. So that's like wearing an exceptionally beautiful puffer coat that comes down to your ankles. And but again, a lot of similarities to what is in the fashion plate. So put this with an umbrella, some matching gloves and boots, and a matching cap, a matching bonnet, and you'd have very close to being stepped out of the fashion plate that we just saw. Now, of course, evening dresses would be needed even at home in the country. And this again is that sort of early, this fashion plate is dated 1822, so we're right at that cusp of the teens into the 20s. You're still seeing the puff sleeves, but more of that rouleau trim, more of those structural details. We've gotten a little bit away from the ruffles on this. And you can see more clearly on this fashion plate, the 3 rows of rouleau trim. So this, judging, from the scale of the fashion plate, is probably about 1 inch to 1.25 inches for each one of these rolls. And it would be tubular around the hem of the dress. And be tubular around the hem of the dress. And then this one actually takes another rouleau in pink satin and weaves it through the top row of the white. Now, all of these would be put on separately. So it's essentially making a tube of fabric and either stuffing it or taking some wadding and covering it as you go. Both ways were correct to do the construction. And then those very lightweight tubes of stuffed fabric would be sewn in different directions along the dress. So this one has a very thick rouleau around the hem with the pink wrapped around the other one. These white pieces are smaller, sort of forming the starburst around the pink roses. Those are likely very narrow rouleau, probably 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch. The leaves are going to be made up of just flat fabric, but they're going to be lined and structured in a way that they'll be 3-dimensional on the dress. And the same thing with the roses as well. There are actually sort of rouleau striping down from the waist all the way down, sort of starts from this bodice up here, and then it falls from the waist down to the starburst of flowers. The headdress in this case, this is actually one of my favorites. I'd love to recreate this one. There's a lot going on, and I didn't even include all of the descriptions here, but it's a toque, which in this case most likely refers to it has a solid base that almost look like a pillbox hat that then the sort of turban pieces are built on top of. So it would sit on the head. It's not it wouldn't need to be something that needs to be rewrapped constantly. And there's all of the white satin. There's several types of pearl trimming on it. It has feathers on top of that. It has some of the pink satin. And then just for kicks on top of that, her jewelry isn't just pearls. Her jewelry is pearls and rubies to pick up the accents in those beautiful pink flowers throughout her dress. She is wearing gloves as well. She could be wearing kid or satin slippers. I don't remember the specifics of this one. And then because even for evening parties, there could still be a chill. So she has a very long, likely silk or possibly extremely lightweight wool shawl that's either been embroidered or woven on both ends. These shawls are exceptionally long. They're often almost 9 to 10 feet. And so they can be draped around you to keep warm, but more often it was an accessory piece to just look glorious as you are draping it artistically and looking picturesque across the room. But something like this, especially because this dress does not appear to have train, all the fullness that you see at the base is coming from the shawl, not from the dress. This is actually pretty walkable to be in a house party, even in the country. Nothing about this to me sort of screams over the top. Evening, yes. Dinner, yes. But it would look beautiful in the evenings with just that little bit of sheen from the satin being reflecting against the candlelight as well. And then, there we go. And then here is that same shape of dress, but this is a cotton dress, taking it back to mourning for a few minutes. But I wanted to bring your attention to these puffs. And so these are those puffs of book muslin I was talking about earlier, but you do see this being done in both the silks and the satins to create these very thick, three-dimensional, very structural pieces. Again, this one's a very fine embroidery with the book muslin, but those pieces and those decor tendencies are kind of flipping back and forth between evening and day wear. And a dress made of this with perhaps instead of the eyelets here being replaced with spangles, having more spangles are the 19th and 18th century word for what we know as sequins today. But having small reflective bits that would pick up the, again, the shimmer of the candlelight. And this dress would also, sorry, quick finger there. This dress would also be appropriate for an evening party at home as well. Lest you think everything is pale shades, I wanted to include this one. This is from the collection of Old Sturbridge Village. It is actually a very, very fine brown and white pinstripe silk. So it sort of reads as a solid color from a distance, but when you get up close, you can actually differentiate between two colors. But it's trimmed in white to really accent all of those structural details. So this one doesn't so much have the rouleau trimming. It has sort of gathered insertion here. And then each one of these little pieces is likely a curve of fabric that has been lined and then individually piped with some contrasting white silk. One of the things that boggles the mind about this period is knowing that we are still a couple decades away from the sewing machine. Not that a lot of people love doing piping on a modern sewing machine, but it's even more finicky doing it by hand, especially when you're talking about doing that much of it. Each one of those pieces would be done separately and then applied one by one along the dress. Fortunately, what there was available is time. Now, Rebecca Gore isn't going to be making these dresses herself. She's going to have maybe even more than one dressmaker that she relies on. She may even be, and Tom and others from Gore Place might be able to answer this more based on accounts that still exist. There's probably going to be even cases where they are sending to London for some clothing as well. The ships are coming into Boston regularly, but sometimes that's just not the quality that people want. And if you have the ability to purchase the best of the best, people still do that. I often equate it today to, it's like, okay, today anyone can go out and buy a black t-shirt, right? You can go to the Gap, you can go to Target, Kohl's, wherever. But if you go to a Target in France, it's much cooler to say that you got your black t-shirt in France than it is to say, oh, I got it at Target in France. And so there's still that cachet of having your things being sent from overseas, having it saying it comes from London, it comes from Paris, even though quite honestly, the quality and the skills are pretty hard to discern in most cases for an evening dress like this. This particular one was made in Massachusetts. This one I think is maybe Seekonk or Swansea. I think this one's south of Boston. When we get to 1827, we have to bid farewell to Christopher Gore. And while mourning clothes were not as officially instituted the way they were in England, and we're still decades away from Queen Victoria sort of mandating them and the Americans following them, there were still certain practices, and especially for the higher classes of higher socioeconomic and political status, you're going to fall into certain habits. Not many mourning dresses still exist that we know were specifically for mourning. So in this case, I'm relying a little bit more on fashion plates and illustrations from the time. So Christopher Gore dies in 1827. Here we have an 1823 mourning picture. This is not a black and white picture. It is actually colored in those colors. It is all stitched in those colors, and in some cases some of it is painted in as well, and she is mourning her 36-year-old husband. This is not Rebecca Gore. This is attributed to Eliza Hall of Boston, mourning her husband who dies at 36 years old. But you can see there's a couple things that stand out to me in this. You do see her white dress now trimmed in black rather than being purely white. You also see a very black shawl rather than some of the more colorful, bright ones. She, interestingly, does not appear to be wearing gloves, but she also has what is likely sort of a black mourning comb or a black comb in her hair. It's a little bit harder to tell what's going on with her front headpiece as well. But bringing in those touches of black is going to signify to someone that, oh, she clearly has recently lost someone, and may give her some of that extra space. So it's as much announcing what has happened in her life as it is a way for her to kind of give herself some space as well. Now this one, I apologize, the quality is a little fuzzy on this one. This is a theorem painting. So it's a watercolor on silk velvet. And it's blank. So it's basically, this would get finished and then you could fill in the details for when someone passed that you wanted to remember. I do like this because it is in that same period that we see the loss of Christopher Gore. So it dates to about 1830. The dress, to my mind, and especially the dress of the gentleman and the children, looks a little bit earlier. I'd actually probably would place it in more of that 1827, 28 period. But you can see she's either not wearing a pure black dress, or if it's black, it's over still all of her white underthings. Or it could be a gray, very pale lilac. There was, again, a wider range of what was considered mourning dress during this period. The children, most likely 2 girls, are wearing black ribbons around their waist, but otherwise, again, they might be wearing gray. They might be wearing some lighter weight black over all of their white underthings as well. So again, we don't know exactly what Rebecca was wearing, but chances are she was, for a stretch of time, she did go into mourning. It was pretty common practice at this point. And mourning clothes and mourning fashions were being sold nonstop. So this is from the same year that Christopher Gore dies, not too distant actually. And it's a little bit fuzzy here, so I'll read this aloud. It says, Whitney and Haskell, number 29 and 31 Market Street, this is in Boston, have received by the London Packet and Sapphire 3 cases of superior jet black broad bombazines. Bombazines are fabrics, manufactured and finished in the most perfect manner, so we all want perfect fabric, of a deep jet black, some of which are as fine and beautiful goods as they have ever received, which they offer at low prices at wholesale or retail. Also, an extensive assortment of wide and narrow super black bombazines of every quality and price, with every other description of mourning articles of the best quality at the lowest prices. Purchasers are respectfully requested to call. This is May 23rd, 1827, Boston. And the ads they're just nonstop. So you can buy mourning jewelry, you can buy mourning gloves, you can buy mourning ribbons. So it's very, very likely that Rebecca would have gone to some form of mourning or shown that and expressed that in a public way, especially for someone who is as widely known as her husband was. There's some really wonderful sort of eulogies printed about him. So yeah, this would have been sort of that norm.
Carrie?
Yep.
So I have a question about the mourning clothes. Alyssa would like to know, I've read of New Englanders having to rush to dye their regular clothes for mourning in this period. Do you think the gray, I think she's referring to the silk work that you were showing, do you think the gray could be a result of the dye not coming out to a deep saturation of color?
Definitely. And I will say that, yes, absolutely. You're going to get different qualities of black. And that's why in the advertisements it's talking about how wonderful their blacks are. So it's really true black. Don't try to do it yourself. Come buy our stuff. I do think that by this period, we're seeing people do a little bit less dyeing of their own fabrics to darken up their clothes. We actually just had a really wonderful mourning program, MOURN program as part of our Halloween program at Old Sturbridge Village. And we talked quite a bit about this, that having a black dress wasn't unusual. It's really all the extra things that you add to it. And in many cases, people aren't, kind of the everyday people aren't going to go to the same lengths that someone like Rebecca Gore would. Rebecca Gore could afford and would be expected to show all the trappings. But yes, absolutely, this theorem painting, that's a great theory, because this is in the collection of Old Sturbridge Village. We are not talking about the highest caliber of the socioeconomic ladder. So yeah, great catch there. Okay. So this one is bonkers, but a morning dress. This one is a French fashion plate. And I left the French words minus the accents because I couldn't get them into the system. But the capote de crêpe and the redingote de laine. The redingote is her coat or pelisse, and that is of wool. That is the de laine. And the capote de crêpe is going to be probably silk crepe, and that is going to refer to sort of her hood and the headwear that she's wearing in this case. And the reason I picked this, even though it's a couple years before Christopher's death, is that there is a great description in Boston that I'm going to read from. And it's, let's see, I'm sorry, it was reprinted in several papers. It originally came from the New York Observer in 1827. And the article is titled "The Weeds of Mourning." When a near friend is removed by death, some external token of grief may not be amiss, provided it be appropriate, since it forms a sort of safeguard against the intrusion of levity and argues a respect for the memory of the departed. But let this delicate memorial degenerate into a mere display, and in proportion to its proper sanctity is disgust which is created. So again, what they're saying is that, you know, it's okay, the mourning clothes, that signifies to others that you are in mourning. But let me read the second half of it. If the present fashion of mourning weeds for hats is not of this description, it is at least a near approximation. It erects a death flag on the heads of the living, so broad and long as it would summon universal admiration. It asks not for condolence, but applause. It says to the beholder, in behalf of the wearer, true, I have lost a friend, but I gain something in point of dress, and perhaps on the whole, the bargain is in my favor. Now let's hope that Rebecca Gore didn't feel that way about gaining some new mourning clothes at the loss of her husband, but you can see where it could go into those extremes for those that were, you know, more fashion conscious and had the means to do so. This is quite the bonnet and coat. And if you're going to be in mourning, you probably don't need to be going out into society as much. It doesn't need to be quite as over the top. So of course, if you took it to those lengths, it would be remarked upon. I think especially in New England, where we tend to be a little bit more staid.
So one more question. I
Sure.
think I missed this one. It goes back a bit, but Laura would like to know, what kind of feathers would this be on the toque?
Oh, ostrich, I believe, on that one. And I can look it up. My contact information will be at the end of the slides. I don't have all of the full descriptions in front of me, but I believe that one was ostrich feathers. Let's go. Sorry to make everyone dizzy going back. There we go. Yes, I believe that was ostrich feathers on that one. Okay, so now let's start to approach the end of Rebecca's life. So for her final 7 years, she is both in Waltham, and she eventually does die in Boston. But we are getting to one of the craziest decades for fashion. And again, for those that I've had the chance to meet before, you'll know that I love the 1830s. I love the crazy sleeves. I love the ridiculous kind of ruffles and things everywhere. But it is a look. And I'm not saying this is what pushed Rebecca over the edge, but I'm also not ruling it out, because not everyone can deal with this level of crazy fashion. This particular dress is another one that's in the collection of Old Sturbridge Village, which again, of course, we focus very much on the 1830s. And this is a roller printed cotton fabric with a white cotton lining. You do start seeing a lot more of these kind of draped across the front and kind of more severe V-neck. You also notice how much closer this is to the natural waist. We're not there yet. The natural waist is probably sort of another waistband distance below where you're seeing this one, but it's now starting to look much more proportional. The corsets or stays and the shift and the petticoats that are worn underneath are still very, very similar to those very first ones we saw. It's just everything's lengthening. And so the waistline is dropping down, the bust is dropping down into a more natural position. For those of us that wear corsetry and historical clothing, I will say this sort of period from 1810 to 1840 has some of the most comfortable corsetry of the period because it is designed to sort of work with a women's shape. It's also one of the only periods in history until the modern day where women are the ones who are creating the corset patterns. And if the people wearing the clothing are also the ones designing it, you do tend to get a little bit more comfort that way. What is changing, even while the waistline is dropping, is the fullness of the skirt. And again, here we have those, approaching watermelon size sleeves. There is padding often in here to support that. You're also seeing multiple petticoats. We're still a couple decades away from wire hoop petticoats. So this look is being achieved by multiple layers of starched and sometimes corded petticoats. You may also see a small ruffled bustle in the back just to give a little bit more fullness. Again, really kind of get that bell shaped. The petticoats are probably stopping a little bit around knee length. So it kind of rounds out and then drops straight to the ground. And then this is the one that I'll sort of leave you with, because this is the epitome of 1830s fashion. And although this one is a French plate, I like to include it because, again, even into the 1830s, the influence in fashion is still coming from France and England. We are starting to see the very beginnings of American fashion plates, but they're not being printed consistently. Godey's Ladies Book, which we know throughout the 19th century, gets its start in the late 1820s. But even those prints they're not being consistently printed every month. And when they are, they're being based out of Philadelphia. So it is definitely a sort of a nod towards Philadelphia fashion and not even exactly Boston or New York. But this is the ideal, is that narrow waist. You're looking for an X-shaped figure. So very broad shoulders, very narrow waist, lots of ruffles, curls down at the side of the face, a kind of TV satellite dish framing your face in your bonnet. It's meant to sort of perch in the back of the head. You're seeing ruffles around the neckline. You may see these pelerines or, again, capes covering out the shoulder. And then this one has even more extreme with the shaping of the skirt. Still have gloves, matching shoes. Her umbrella in this case does not match. You see a little bit less jewelry during this period only because it's covered up. So you see longer chains and brooches and so on. But again, I'm not saying that this is the note that Rebecca decided to, pushed her over the edge. But if you grew up wearing all those beautiful neoclassical silhouettes, I can imagine this had to have come as quite a bit of a shock as you're approaching, later years in your life and so on too. And with that, I bring you to her final death announcement. So we have April 19th, 1834, which incidentally is Patriots' Day. And the last line, you just have, in Boston, Mrs. Rebecca Gore, widow of the late Governor Gore, just announcing her death. There's very little published other than that. And then later that same year in November, in fact, tomorrow would be the anniversary, is when this was published, is when the country seat of the late Governor Gore and Rebecca was sold at auction and left the family. Now, the last thing I will leave you with, bring this up, thank you, is the Rebecca Gore did leave bequests, and Christopher Gore had left legacies to different organizations. And most of what's written about Rebecca Gore is either just sort of acknowledging the bequest she left, which is primarily to kind of approving her husband's legacies to Harvard University, or it's women complaining about how she wasn't supporting women's women's history, women's learning and education. But I like to think that all of that, those funds that went to those places like Massachusetts Historical Society and the Arts Association that eventually became the MFA, as well as Harvard University, have helped to get us to, you know, where women are today, and continuing to foster the learning and education into remarkable people like Rebecca, not just what she wore, but all of the other contributions she made to the house, to the community, and not just always living in the shadow of her husband. So with that, I'll sort of conclude the fashion portion of the presentation. Again, I want to thank Gore Place enormously for inviting me back, and to Mass Humanities for sponsoring this program. And with that, I'll give you quick contact information for anyone that is interested in reaching out. I love chatting costume, as I know I've met a bunch of you in the past at Gore Place events or at other places around. Never tired of talking fashion history, and hope to see you at Gore Place again soon.
Fantastic. I have one more question, Diane. And by the way, folks, you can still have time to put questions in the Q&A or the chat. Diane asks, Rebecca aged from about 40 to 70 years old in the period you covered. In what ways, if any, might age, especially older age, have impacted her fashion choices? And I think you alluded to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Rebecca is going to be a little bit in a sticky situation just because of her socioeconomic status. There'd be certain expectations placed on her and the way the time worked. And I'm going to stop sharing so you can, there we go. There'd be certain expectations placed on her so that she couldn't entirely do what she wanted and maybe entirely stick to the fashions that she enjoyed when she was younger. There might be some nods to that, but she would be aware of what a lot of the newest fashions were, even if she was a step or two behind. So if anything, she might, you know, wear a little bit less petticoat, or, you know, still cling to some of the slimmer silhouettes, but she wouldn't be able to abandon them entirely. Again, and I'll defer to Tom and others that about you know, how many specifics we know about Rebecca's life in particular, but so much of what people were doing in the past, those specifics are lost. So was she able to relax when she was at home with just her servants at Gore Place, and maybe you know, wear some of her older favorite gowns? Maybe, but chances are she's still going to be keeping up a pretty busy social life. It's just on a country speed and country pace rather than the city pace. So yeah, it will play in, but not as much as someone living, you know, out towards, you know, again, Waltham's only 9 miles outside of Boston. So if you're heading out more towards like the Berkshires or towards like Northampton, Massachusetts. So again, like 60 or 70 miles outside of Boston, where there's just going to be a little bit less influence even from some of the other cities like Hartford and Springfield. Yeah, she's not going to have as much say as those that are less in the public eye.
So I have a question. People often ask, you talked about morning dress and MORNING, and a walking dress and an evening dress. How many changes of clothing are we talking about for someone like Rebecca Gore in season when there's parties? And
how many changes of dress in a day?
A day, yes. A day. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's really, so she's probably going to have, you know, a morning dress, which may not even be as put together as some of the examples I showed. And that's going to be, you know, from whatever time she gets up until, you know, probably late morning. And then if she's doing any visiting or going out in the ground, she's going to dress again, over that. And again, depending on the morning dress and the day, it may be a police or something, or running coat that she puts on over that. So it's probably going to be a midday dress. And then if there is any kind of dinner party or you know, afternoon something, that would be 3. And then on the rarest occasions, you might see like an evening assembly. So you might have dinner and then there'd be a ball or an assembly. So dinner might be, you know, at 8 and there'd be a ball or an assembly at like 11 o'clock. So it could be as many as 4, but that would probably be pushing it on a lot of days.
Fantastic. If anyone else has any questions, I don't see any more questions. It just leaves it to me to say thank you to everyone for attending, and a special thank to Carrie Midura for doing such a wonderful job. It was very interesting. I just love looking at, even in the background, looking at the things you have there. It was very interesting. And the other thing I thought was fascinating was the wide range of fashion changes. I mean, fashion was changing fairly quickly, wasn't it? It was.
It really was.
Years.
Yeah, no, it really was. I mean, again, not everyone had access to the constant changes the way Rebecca might have. But yes, it was changing, you know, again, not hour by hour the way we have it today, but very rapidly. And it wasn't a long time to get that information from London to here. I know I'd done some programs with Historic Deerfield at once, and we were talking about how quickly the fashion descriptions made their way over. And there were examples where we found them printed in a London newspaper, and in less than 5 weeks, they were being printed in the Northampton newspapers, word for word with the images. So that's a really quick turnaround to kind of get the state of the art. So Boston's going to get it even quicker than that. So yeah, very, very rapid. And there's a really wide change in that period, almost as much from 1806 to the late 1830s as there were from sort of the Revolution to 1806. And I also did want to give a shout out, if Alyssa is still on here, that yes, Jane Nylander's book, Our Own Snug Fireside, is amazing. But I think some of that, it does refer to some of the earlier tendencies to re-dye fabric. So yeah, awesome catch, because it definitely was happening. Because we talk about that a bit at Sturbridge, where of course Jane is an honorary trustee as well. And but in Boston, yeah, Rebecca wouldn't need to be doing that as much, but I'm definitely gonna have to go back and look at those theorem paintings and see if that it gives us any more information.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Carrie. And everyone, I just want to let you know that we are planning 6 more such webinars, including another one from Carrie next year in 2023. So please, I've put in the chat a link to what's on at Gore Place, so you can see all the wonderful events that we're coming up on. And I just leave it to thank you again, Carrie, and thank you everyone for joining us. And that's the end of our presentation. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.